Hello everyone, and welcome to our tutorial about using Jenkins on Azure with the Azure AD plugin. In this tutorial, we will help you with creating an Ubuntu virtual machine, as well as installing Docker. After installing Docker, we will create a Jenkins image and launch this image. After that, we will create an Azure AD tenant and add users to the Azure Active Directory. Finally, we will create several groups in which the users will be added to show you that you can give different permissions to the different Azure AD groups within Jenkins. To support our tutorial, we have divided this tutorial in three main parts. 1. Setting up a virtual machine on Microsoft Azure. 2. Installing Docker and Jenkins on the virtual machine. And 3. Installing the Azure Active Directory plugin on Jenkins. To help you understand the installation of Jenkins on Azure, we have divided this video in several steps. First, we're going to sign in to the Azure portal and we're going to create a virtual machine for Jenkins. After that, we're going to open a port for the Jenkins deployment. When the port has been opened, we're going to connect to the newly created Azure virtual machine. On the virtual machine, we're going to elevate our rights, installing and updating all packages. After all packages are installed and updated, we're going to install Docker and Jenkins. When Jenkins is up and running, we're going to install the Azure AD plugin for Jenkins. The first step is setting up a virtual machine on Azure. In this step, we will discuss how to install a virtual machine, which virtual machine we'll be using, and what settings the virtual machine needs to be able to run Jenkins. Before we're able to create a virtual machine, we have to sign in or sign up on the Azure portal. On the Azure portal, you can manage all your cloud services and applications. Now that we're on the portal.azure.com site and I've already signed in, we're going to head over to the marketplace. The marketplace is under More Services. There you can type in Marketplace and go to the marketplace. Here we are trying to find the Ubuntu server. So we're typing in Ubuntu server. And we want to select the 20.04 LTS. And here we want to create a new server. To create our server, we need to change the following settings for the virtual machine. The subscription. As I'm a student, I'll be using the Azure for Students. Another subscription should work fine as well, as long as you have a valid amount of credits on it. The resource group. In this tutorial, we're naming the resource group Jenkins tutorial, but another name can be chosen as well. To create a new resource group, just simply select the Create New Resource Group and give it a name. A resource group contains the resources required to successfully deploy a VM in Azure. It is a container that holds related resources for an Azure solution. In Azure, you logically group related resources such as storage accounts, virtual networks, and virtual machines to deploy, manage, and maintain them as a single entity. Now we also need to name our virtual machine. In our case, we'll be naming it Ubuntu Server 20.04 Jenkins Tutorial, but again another name is fine to use. This will be the identity of the virtual machine. Note that you cannot change the name after the virtual machine has been made. The host name of the virtual machine can be edited when connected to the virtual machine. Now for the region. Since I live in Europe, I am using the West Europe as the region where the virtual machine is hosted. Please use the to you closest region so there will be as little as possible delay or latency. We are not going to change the availability options, and as an image we are using the Ubuntu Server 20.04 LTS Gen 1. We are using Ubuntu Server because Ubuntu gets frequent package updates and has a great deal of support for container and cloud deployments. We don't need the Azure Spot instance, so we will be selecting no. We are selecting the standard B1S size because this suits my needs. Depending on your needs, you will be able to select another size. The recommended requirements for Ubuntu Server are 1 GHz CPU, 512 MB of RAM, and 2.5 GB of storage, while Jenkins only needs 256 MB of RAM and 10 GB of storage as minimum, though 1 GB of RAM and 50 GB of storage is advised. For the authentication, we'll be using the username password. SSH via private/public is also an option, but for the sake of this video, we'll be using the username password. Please note that a strong and long password is advised for security reasons. Here we can enter our name, in my case, Jenkins tutorial, with the password. We will be allowing SSH so we can remotely access the virtual machine to install Jenkins in a later chapter. For my purpose, the disk networking management, advanced, and text settings do not need to change. So we'll be heading over to Review and Create tab and hit the Create button. Now that we've hit the Create button, Azure is creating our virtual machine. This takes a couple of minutes. Now the next step in this tutorial will be opening a port for Jenkins deployment. Now that our virtual machine has been created, we're heading over to the resource groups to verify it was created correctly and the settings that are necessary for accessing Jenkins via the browser. So we go to Resources. Next up, we're going to Networking. And here we want to create a new inbound port rule. So we'll be clicking the Add Inbound Port rule. And here we want to add a new role for port 8080. So the destination port ranges will be 8080. And as you can see, Azure already did every setting we need. So we can only change the name if we want to, or add a description to the port rule. I will be adding Jenkins tutorial as the description. Then we will click on Add to add the inbound security rule. Now Azure is creating our security rule, and in a couple of seconds it should be enabled, as you can see. Now our next step will be to connect to the newly created virtual machine, and therefore we need the public IP address. As you can see, here we have the NIC public IP address, and we want to copy and paste this in our shell environment we're going to connect. Next up, we'll be taking a look at connecting to the Azure virtual machine. We'll be doing this via SSH with the username password. Since I'm on a Windows computer, I'll be using the PowerShell. If you are on macOS or a Linux user, you can also open the terminal. In the shell environment, we're going to connect to the virtual machine using SSH the following way. SSH, and then the name you've chosen to connect to your virtual machine. So in my case, that will be Jenkins tutorial, and then the public IP you just copied. You can also copy commands from the description of this video. Now we want to press enter. Because we are connecting for the first time to the virtual machine, we need to agree to establish a connection with the virtual machine. In my case, I'll be typing yes. Now we're prompted to our password, which we made earlier. For security reasons, you won't see the password in plain text, but if you type it in, it is actually typed in but transparent. If the password and username are correct, we are successfully connected to the virtual machine to SSH on port 22. As you can see, we're connected to the virtual machine. Now that we are successfully connected to our virtual machine using SSH, we'll be taking a look at elevating rights and updating packages. Since we'll be updating and installing multiple applications, we are going to elevate our permissions to root. The root user is a user on Linux with the highest rights. This way we can edit files without having the need of constantly getting prompted to enter our password. This makes it much easier and faster because you do not have to put sudo in front of every command. We can do this by typing sudo -i, and we can leave the root user by typing exit. Be advised that you should only enter the root user when you know what you're doing. You can harm your system in root a lot because you're not prompted if you do something you shouldn't do. Next up, we'll be updating all the current packages for security, stability, and compatibility reasons. This can be done using the command apt update && apt upgrade. Now the virtual machine will update and upgrade all packages. Wait for the virtual machine to finish updating. If prompted to continue, press Y and enter to confirm. Now that our virtual machine has been updated, we will be continuing installing Docker and Jenkins. Now that our virtual machine is up to date, we can install Docker and Jenkins. We'll be using Docker to run our Jenkins container inside. So we first need to install Docker. We are choosing Docker because of the upcoming popularity of container-driven platforms. Besides this, Docker simplifies the updating process. This is because you can simply download the latest version of an image. We can install Docker with the following command. Again, if prompted, press Y, followed by an enter. And again, wait for the process to finish. Now that Docker has been installed, we want to download Jenkins from Docker Hub, the place where images are stored and shared between Docker users. This can be done using the command. This command will download a ready-to-run version of Jenkins for us. Now that Jenkins has been downloaded, we can run the container. This can be done using the command. Note that we're still using port 8080 as specified earlier. All the commands in this tutorial are available in the video description. Again, wait for the process to finish. After the container is started, be sure to store the password that will be prompted by the Jenkins container in a safe location. We need to use this password to log in. The password is specified over here. Now that Jenkins is up and running, we need to connect to Jenkins via the web browser. Enter the IP address we've used to connect to the virtual machine via SSH, followed by a column and a port we've opened, in my case port 8080. Fill in the password which Jenkins gave us upon running the container. Click Continue. As you can see, we've entered the Customize Jenkins page. Jenkins is now installed on your Azure virtual machine. The next part of this tutorial will be on how to install Jenkins using HTTPS. Now we can leave the root user. This can be done using the command exit. To get a secure connection to Jenkins, we need to implement a way to enable HTTPS on Jenkins. This is because the Azure AD plugin requires a HTTPS connection. We are going to accomplish this by using a program called KeyTool, where we can create a self-signed certificate. We are using KeyTool because this tool is able to create certificates which Java applications can use. Since KeyTool needs Java to run the program, we will have to download it. We will need the Java development kit and the Java runtime environment, so the JDK and the GRE. This can be obtained running the command. The next step is creating the certificate. First, we have to make a subdirectory in a directory where we have read and write permissions to. Therefore, we should create it in our home directory. We should also give this directory an easy to remember name. So let's name it Jenkins key for now. After that, we are going to enter the directory. Now we should generate the certificate key. We can achieve this by running the following KeyTool command. When you enter the KeyTool command, a prompt will appear asking for information. This information will be used when someone checks the certificate, so be sure to enter the right information. Exit the Jenkins key directory and make a directory called Jenkins, where the Jenkins home folder will be mounted. We can do this by doing the following commands. Next up, we want to copy the Jenkins key in case of losing the key. This can be done with the following command. When the certificate has been made successfully, we can run the Docker instance using the following command. As you can see, Jenkins is now fully up and running. Again, copy the password which the Jenkins installation gave us. We will need to enter the admin account on the Jenkins webpage. Now we're going to head over to the Jenkins webpage. To connect to Jenkins, we need to add HTTPS in front of the IP address. As you can see, you are prompted that it's not a secure connection. This is because we have used a self-signed certificate. Now again, enter the administrator password Jenkins gave us earlier. As you can see, we have now logged into Jenkins. Please install the suggested plugins. Now wait for Jenkins to finish up. Now Jenkins asks us for the first admin user. We go ahead and skip this part. Also, the instance configurations will be skipped. Next up, click Start using Jenkins. Now we can continue with our tutorial. Now we're going to take a look at how to install the Azure AD plugin on Jenkins, and also connecting Jenkins to Azure AD. Furthermore, we are going to create a user and log in with our newly created user on Jenkins. This will be part 1 of the Azure AD installation of Jenkins, and the other part will consist of setting up an Azure AD group for Jenkins. Now we will install the Jenkins Azure AD plugin. In Jenkins, go to the plugin manager and search for Azure AD. Select the plugin and click Install without restart. While the plugin is being installed, go to the Azure portal. In the Azure portal, find the marketplace and search for Azure Active Directory. Create an instance of it. It's free to use, as long as you are not going to use features such as Office 365 users or having very many users or groups. Azure will immediately ask you to create a tenant. Give it a name and a subdomain, and select your preferred data center region. In our case, this will be the Netherlands. It will take about half a minute to create a tenant. Now that the tenant has been created, we can go back to Jenkins. Here we need to select Manage Jenkins and configure global security. You can set up the Azure AD settings right here. So we will be selecting Azure Active Directory. So we now need to retrieve the settings from the Azure Active Directory. So we need to go back to the Azure portal. As you can see, the Azure portal gives us the notification that the tenant has been created. Now we click here to manage your new tenant. Here we want to select app registrations and create a new registration. Now we need to enter a name. In our case, this will be Jenkins, but it can be something different as well. We also need to specify the redirect URI. We can do this by copying the IP address or the domain name from Jenkins and add security realm/finish login after it. This is needed for Jenkins to work properly according to the plugin documentation. Otherwise, Microsoft refuses you to log in on Jenkins with their OAuth 2 service. This is what Azure uses. You can also choose the supported account types. If you prefer every Microsoft account to have access, which is very unrecommended due to security considerations at the moment, you can choose another option than the default one. Now we hit the register button to create our instance. Now let's go ahead to the overview. We are going to copy the client ID and tenant ID from the Azure portal to Jenkins. After that, we are going to generate a client secret within the Azure and copy that one to Jenkins too. To create a secret, click on Certificates and Secrets, New Client Secret, and click on Add. Copy the value and paste it in the client secret. That's all we have to do to make it work. Now click on Verify Application. It will show you Successfully Verified to show that the connection can be successfully established between your Azure AD and Jenkins. Now we're going to head back to the Azure web portal. Click on Authentication on the left sidebar within the Azure portal and toggle the checkbox for ID token implicit grant. This is necessary for all features to work, like working with groups, which we will cover in the next part of the video. We can provide the logout URL here too, although this is not necessary. This is the URL Jenkins will redirect us to after logging out. Finally, hit the Save button in the Azure web portal and of course in Jenkins. Now let's go ahead to the authorization part within Jenkins Global Security Settings. There's a working connection between Azure and Jenkins at this moment, although we want to use it for authentication and authorization for Jenkins. Luckily, there's an option for that. Scroll down a little and turn this option on. It is very important to give all authenticated users at this moment all permissions. This is a safe option for now, as you are the only user with the access to the tenant at the moment. After saving the settings, Jenkins will immediately redirect you to the Azure OAuth 2 landing page to log in. Log in using your Microsoft credentials as usual. And as you can see, it will work. You might wonder if you are something like an administrator or not. Jenkins, by its nature, does not use different roles for different users. Every user may do anything. By using this plugin, group-based access control can be achieved. To show that it works properly, we will make an account within the newly created tenant. We can create a new user by clicking on Users and click on New User. Give it a fictional name, username and password and create the account. After creating it, we will use it to log in within Jenkins. And as you can see, Azure has now created our new user. Now we are going to log in on the new user. Use the specified email address and password you entered earlier. Due to Microsoft password policy, the password has to be changed the first time we log in, for the sake of security. And as you can see, we are now logged in as the Jenkins programmer account, which we created newly on our Azure AD platform. Hopefully you can log in now. If not, please review all earlier steps in this video and check everything carefully. The final step in this tutorial will consist of creating a group in the Azure AD, adding a user to the Azure AD group, changing the API permissions, and changing permissions per group in Jenkins. Since the plugin is working now, we will go ahead to the next part of the video. We are going to create a group in the Azure AD. So first we're going to click on Groups within the Azure portal. Next up, we're selecting New Group. Here, we are going to create a new group. I will call it Students for now. Hit the Create button, and as you can see, Azure AD made our Students group. Now that we have our group, we are going to make a new user and assign it to the group Students. So head over to Users and create a new user. In my case, I will call it John Doe. We also need to add John Doe to our new Students group. Hit the Zero Group Selected, select the Student group, and hit Select. After that, you can safely create the new user by hitting the Create button. And as you can see, our new user has been created with the selected group. To make the group-based access control work, we have to do a few things in Azure and Jenkins. First, we need to select the app registrations. Next up, select our tenant. In our case, it's Jenkins. Then select the API permissions on the left side of the screen. Then click on Add a permission and scroll all the way down to the Azure Active Directory graph. On the Azure Active Directory graph, select Application Permissions and scroll down until you see Directory Read All, Read Directory Data, and select this one. Don't forget to click on Add Permissions. This permission gives Jenkins the ability to read the data from the Azure AD. Finally, hit the Grant Admin Consent for Jenkins tutorial and don't forget to click Yes. As you can see, Jenkins can now see our students group we made earlier. Now we're also going to create a teachers group and add a user to the teachers group. Since we have already done this, I will speed up the process. And as you can see, Jenkins is now also able to see the new teachers group. Next up, we're going to set the permissions for the student and teachers group. The teachers in our case get all permissions, while the students only get certain permissions. We will also delete all the available permissions for the authenticated users. Of course, don't forget to hit the save button, so all permissions will be saved. You will get a prompt that your access has been denied. This is because the user we are logged into is the Jenkins tutorial user, which is an authenticated user. Since we denied all permissions of the authenticated users, we will get the error message. Now we're going to log out from the Jenkins programmer and sign in to the Mr. Professor account, which we made earlier. And as you can see, we're now logged into the Mr. Professor account. Next up, we're going to log into the student account to show you that the student account doesn't have the same permissions as the teacher account. So we're going to log out and log into the student account. And as you can see, the student account has much less permissions than the teacher account. Hopefully this tutorial has helped you on how to set up a virtual machine, an Azure Active Directory, and of course a Docker installed Jenkins application. Thanks for watching our tutorial.